Let's talk about what you and the legislature in Mississippi is doing, because I'm sure I don't need to tell you, Mississippi this week became the state with the worst number of coronavirus deaths per capita. In fact, if Mississippi were its own country, you would be second in the world only to Peru in terms of deaths per capita. That's a horrible, horrible, heartbreaking statistic. So with all due respect, Governor, your way is failing. Are you going to try to change anything to change this horrible statistic from what you're doing already?
Yeah, well, obviously, in Mississippi, our legislature is a part-time legislature. Sometimes I wonder if in America, if our Congress was part-time, we wouldn't be in a better position. But let's talk a little bit about
better position than
Mississippi
what?
And where
Your
we
state
are with
is
the virus.
second worst in the world. I mean, how can you say that?
Let's talk about where we are and why. Well, Jake, let's talk about where we are and why we are there. In large part, just like the summer of 2020, it was the Sun Belt states that saw the initial surge from the Delta variant. It started, the first state that I saw seeing upticks was Missouri, and then it was Arkansas, and then it was Louisiana, and now it's Mississippi. Our surge went from less than 100 cases per day in Mississippi to 3,600, much like what happened in the country of Israel, like what happened in the country of Great Britain and in England. We saw a very quick spike, and now we're seeing a very quick decline in the total number of cases. We spiked at about 3,600. We're now half of that in our state. As you know, right. Unfortunately, fatalities is a lagging indicator when it comes to the virus. It is a lagging indicator. And so timing has as much to do with that statistic that you used as anything else. As we see in 2021, what occurred in 2020 as the Delta variant moves around the country, and it's going to happen. The president wants you to believe that the Delta variant is only affecting Republicans in red states.
Change anything?
That's just not true. That is not a fact. That is just not true. And so what you're going to see.
So, Governor, my point is this: you compared yourself to Israel.
The Delta
Israel
variant is going to continue to move around the country, and you're going to see fatalities rise in other states. And so here's what we need to focus on, Jake. Okay, let's focus on this.
But my question is, what are you going to do to change this?
The best thing for Americans to do to protect themselves from the virus, and again, we believe in personal responsibility. Individual Americans and individual Mississippians
so you're not going to change anything.
Make good decisions to take care of themselves. The best thing that Americans can do, number one, is to talk to their doctor about potentially getting the vaccine, because in our state, some 89% of those hospitalized and some 87% of those who are of the deaths are actually coming from those who are unvaccinated. So the number one thing that you can do is you can talk to your doctor about getting vaccinated. The number two thing is, if you get the virus, and this is very important, if you get the virus, please talk to your doctor about the monoclonal antibody treatment.
You're not going to change anything.
That is the best way in which to do that. And unfortunately, the Biden administration continues to try to reduce the allocation to red states like Mississippi and Florida of that monoclonal antibody treatment.
Governor,
it's outrageous.
Governor, if Mississippi were a country, you would have the second worst per capita death toll in the world. And I'm saying, are you going to do anything to try to change that?
Jake, as I mentioned earlier, deaths, unfortunately, are a lagging indicator. Our total number of cases went from 100 to 3,600, and over the last 2 weeks has declined. They have been cut in half, from 3,600 to 1,800. When you wanted me to come on 3 or 4 weeks ago, you want to talk about our number of cases. And then you want to talk about our hospitalizations. Now you want to talk about a lagging indicator, which is sad and it's
I'm trying
horrible.
To talk about dead Mississippians is what I'm trying to talk about.
All 9,000 Mississippians that have passed away. But let's put this in perspective, Jake. I mean, the reality is Mississippi accounts for 1% of the U.S. population. We account for 1.1% of the total number of cases in America, and we account for 1.29% of the total number of fatalities in America. And so the reality is the Delta variant is very transmissible, and it is moving around the country. If you want to talk about cases right now, talk about Kentucky. or West Virginia, or what's happening in North Carolina, or moving into Southern Virginia.
I'm asking
This
you about
virus
your
is very
state, but I'm not going to
transmissible.
ask you about West Virginia or Kentucky. I'm going to ask you about your state, and I'm just saying you seem to be very, very activated when it comes to fighting the mandate from the federal government. And I understand the arguments you're making, but what President Biden is trying to do is save lives. Now, you can think it's bad policy or it's unconstitutional, and that's fine. We can have that discussion. We already have. But he's trying to save lives. I'm saying to you, your way's not working. And whether you say it's a lagging indicator or whatever your argument is, Mississippi now has, if it were its own country, the second worst per capita death rate in the world, behind only Peru. And I'm saying, are you going to try to do anything to change that? And I'm not hearing an answer.
This interview is like a masterclass in what not to say when you've just overseen the worst response in the nation to a pandemic. For example, right off the bat, Jake Tapper confronts Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves with the fact that his state ranks second in the world on per capita deaths from COVID and asks if he's going to change anything, which, to be clear, is a very, very, very valid question. And Reeves inexplicably explains that his state's legislature is a part-time legislature and that if Congress was part-time, we might be in a better position. Now, I quite literally don't know what that means. That is an unintelligible string of words that I can only imagine is an attempt to deflect responsibility. But if you can explain to me what the United States Congress would have to do with Mississippi's part-time state legislature as it relates to Mississippi's COVID deaths, I'm all ears. From there, Reeves reverts to surges in Israel and Great Britain, where they had spikes and then subsequent downturns. In other words, Reeves is absolving himself for not protecting the people in his own state by pointing to countries on the other side of the world. Countries, by the way, that are still not even failing as poorly on a per capita basis as Mississippi is. Because as long as the GOP has whataboutisms, then it can't hold itself responsible for anything. Now, Jake Tapper does continue to press Reeves for any change whatsoever that he would make, as, again, his state represents the second worst response in the entire world to COVID. And the best that he could conjure up here isn't even a full-throated encouragement to get the vaccine, but instead, a rather tepid suggestion to just talk to your doctor about the vaccine. The Republican Party is such a hostage to the Looney Tunes in their fringes of their base that even though 99% of those being hospitalized and dying are the unvaccinated, even though the vaccine is clearly directly responsible for saving lives, still they're horrified of just coming out and saying, go get the vaccine. They have turned the one steadfast solution into such a culture war issue that they have no choice but to tiptoe around this and walk on eggshells while their own voters are dying in unprecedented numbers. These Republican governors like Tate Reeves might fashion themselves patriots or freedom defenders or whatever else they like to call themselves to make themselves feel better, but let me be clear here, they are outright cowards. They are scared little children who can't bear the prospect of angering a few loudmouths in their base that they would rather just let people die than take a stand for something that they know is the right position. So yeah, some real storming the beaches of Normandy energy right there. Reeves even tries to desperately trash the Biden administration by claiming that they're trying to reduce the allocation of the monoclonal antibody treatment. And it's true that the Biden administration has imposed limits, but that's because only 7 states, including Mississippi, make up 70% of demand for monoclonal antibodies. And so they had to make sure that the rest of the country has access. I know thinking about other people isn't exactly a priority for Republican politicians, but the sun and the earth doesn't revolve around just a few states. And beyond that, it's ironic that Reeves is complaining that there's not enough of a treatment for COVID, while barely paying attention to the thing that would actually prevent people from even needing the treatment, which is the vaccine. I will never understand Republicans desperately rallying around a treatment, all while effectively ignoring the cure. It's like instead of putting a traffic light at an intersection, they're just gonna park an ambulance there and wait for people to crash so that they can treat them after. It makes zero sense. But again, we know why. It's because Republicans have decided that the vaccine is radioactive politically, and so they're forced to focus their energy elsewhere, even if that solution is subpar, because their politics is more important than your survival. And finally, once Jake Tapper asks for the umpteenth time whether Reeves is going to do anything differently, Reeves falls back on the fact that Mississippi is only 1% of the country's population and that we should really be focusing on Kentucky or North Carolina or Virginia. In other words, the answer is no. No, because apparently the proportion of Mississippians to the rest of Americans isn't big enough. No, because other states are also doing poorly. any way you cut it, it's clear that Tate Reeves is not going to give a clear answer, and that's because the answer is that he's not gonna change anything. He doesn't care if people are dying, because acknowledging that and moving to rectify it by promoting the obvious solution, which is vaccinations, isn't politically acceptable. So no, he will change nothing, because part of succeeding in today's GOP is allowing people to die to try and win the culture war. And while I'm not really sure how letting your own base die off can be construed as a win, that's a question that Tate Reeves seems better positioned to answer than anyone right now. If you enjoyed that video and you're looking for a deeper dive, check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. It's a no BS look at the top stories of the week, along with interviews with the top names in politics, like Vice President Kamala Harris, Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Katie Porter, Pete Buttigieg, and more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Also, if you want to see more videos like this one, click the subscribe link right here on this screen to join the more than 1 million people who've already subscribed to my channel. And finally, to donate to my Don't Be a Mitch fund, where I'm raising money for a whole raft of different voter outreach and voter registration groups in the closest states ahead of midterms in 2022, including Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Texas. You can find that link on this screen as well. Thanks for watching.